At this time, the Soviets began receiving aid from the United States. In the last 3 months of 1942, the US sent the USSR 60,000 trucks, 2 million pairs of boots, 50,000 tons of explosives, 450,000 tons of steel, and 250,000 tons of aviation fuel. By the end of November, although progress had slowed, Axis forces occupied 90% of the devastated city, reaching the west bank of the Volga. As the desperate defense continued in Stalingrad, the Soviets devised an offensive plan named Uranus, aiming to encircle the German units trapped in the city from outside. On November 19, 1942, Operation Uranus began with the Soviet Army attacking from the north of Stalingrad. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Soviet armies under General Nikolai Vachedin quickly destroyed the poorly equipped Romanian army. In 2 days of fighting, the 3rd Romanian Army suffered 75,000 casualties. The next day, November 20th, a second Soviet offensive targeted the Romanian 4th Corps in the south of Stalingrad. This assault formed the southern part of the encirclement. The 5,000 strong Romanian forces were completely annihilated. On November 22nd, the northern and southern Soviet armies linked up. Thus, 290,000 German, Romanian, and Croatian troops were encircled in Stalingrad. The besieged Axis forces required a minimum of 800 tons of supplies daily, while airdrops delivered only up to 117 tons. Despite recognizing the shortage, Hitler continued to order the trapped units not to surrender. The 6th German Army was confined to an area of 40-60 kilometers. Soon, air supply was completely cut off. Severe weather conditions, technical problems, and intense Soviet air defenses increasingly complicated matters. Throughout December, the Soviets managed to shoot down nearly 1,000 German transport planes. As a result, food shortages appeared day by day, and each soldier was rationed 2 slices of bread per day. Thousands of soldiers died from malnutrition, extreme cold, and disease. On December 16, 1942, the Soviet Army launched its second general offensive. This operation, called the Little Saturn, aimed to push Axis forces back across the Don River and recapture Rostov. Quickly, the German army group had to retreat from the Caucasus and establish a new front 250 kilometers behind Rostov. Some German officers asked General Paulus to disobey Hitler's order to hold positions and attempt a breakout from the encirclement. However, Paulus refused, not wanting to disobey orders. There was also insufficient fuel for a motorized breakout. The Germans reorganized the 11th Army as the Don Army Group to plan a counterattack. The Winter Storm operation began on December 12, 1942, attacking from the southwest of Stalingrad. The operation initially broke through 2 Soviet lines, but progress was halted by Soviet reinforcements. German commander Maxstein tried for 4 days to breach the Soviet front. However, on December 23rd, he was ordered to withdraw 50 kilometers short of the 6th Army's position. By then, the 6th German Army was left to its fate. Soviet General Konstantin Rokossovsky called for the surrender of encircled German troops on January 8, 1943. The situation was immediately reported to Hitler, who rejected the proposal. Under General Rokossovsky, Soviet forces launched a major attack on January 10, 1943, against the German forces in Stalingrad. After 6 days, the Axis defense area was halved to a 20 to 14 kilometer zone. On January 21st, Soviet Don Front Commander General Lukovsky again called for Paulus to surrender. Paulus, following Hitler's orders, refused once more. Subsequent Soviet attacks gradually reduced the German defensive area further. On January 30th, Hitler promoted Paulus to Field Marshal, hoping he would never surrender, as no German Field Marshal had been captured before. On the night of January 31st, with no escape left, Paulus and his staff surrendered unconditionally to a Soviet unit. By February 2, 1943, 91,000 Axis troops in Stalingrad had surrendered completely. Only 5,000 of the prisoners eventually returned home. The majority perished in POW camps or from disease en route. Total German losses at Stalingrad reached 850,000, while Soviet losses totaled 1 million. After regaining the initiative, the German army focused on a strategic target, Kursk. Capturing Kursk would secure the north-south railway from Moscow to Rostov and destroy a fifth of Soviet forces. Preparations began, but Soviet air forces continuously disrupted them. On April 17, 1943, an attack on a German airbase in southern Orsha destroyed 10 planes. 3 days later, the Soviets neutralized 10 high-level reconnaissance aircraft. These strikes weakened German reconnaissance. It took the Germans for months to feel fully prepared. They amassed 3,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, 2,100 aircraft, and 900,000 troops, the largest force assembled up to that point. However, Hitler still doubted whether preparations were sufficient. The first clashes began on July 4, 1943, with the 4th Panzer Army clearing Soviet forward outposts in the south. That afternoon, German aircraft bombed the northern Soviet front line, striking a 3 km area in 10 minutes. The 3rd Panzer Corps advanced on Soviet positions at Zavodovia. Simultaneously, the 3rd Division attacked Butova under heavy rain, while the 11th Panzer Division seized dominating heights around Butova. On July 5, German forces under Manstein launched an attack on the Kursk center with 36 divisions. For a week, repeated German assaults failed to break Soviet stubborn defenses. German panzer units suffered heavy losses from minefields, intense artillery, and Soviet tank attacks, ultimately forcing a retreat. On July 6, massive air battles took place in the northern sector. On the first day, the Soviets suffered heavy losses, losing 91 aircraft. The next day, the German 47th Panzer Corps advanced from its positions and encircled the Soviet tank corps. However, Soviet aircraft conducted bombings that destroyed 20 tanks and heavily damaged 40. The Germans were forced to retreat quickly, and Hitler issued an order to halt the northern Kursk offensive. In the southern sector, where German forces had more tank strength, the advance similarly slowed, and the front line narrowed. On July 11th, the Soviet Defense Front committed reinforcements to the battle. On July 12th, the largest tank battle in history took place between the German Panzer Corps and the Soviet Tank Army, the Battle of Prokhorovka. We've reached the end of this episode. I hope this episode was both informative and interesting for you. Don't forget to follow the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next parts. See you in the next episode.